One of the most hated jobs in any workshop, there's going to be one or two things, is the first one is going to be changing the dust extractor or the bags on there because it's a messy, horrible job and no one wants to do that. The other one, which is a close second, is sanding. It's a long and slow, tedious job. I've never met anyone who actually enjoys sanding down, but it's an essential bit to do at the end of your job. Sanding a project down, in my case it's a door, to a good finish, getting a good result is going to make a difference between a good finished project or a bad one. There are some tips that you can use to kind of improve what you're doing and make it a little bit easier. The first thing is a good quality sander. You don't necessarily need the best money can buy, but a good quality one depending on what you're going to do. I've got quite an aggressive sander. It's a 5.0 orbital sander, so that's quite an aggressive random orbiter. You can get low ones, so fine finish work can be a 1. That's basically just the amount of millimeters that it's rotating as it spins round. The higher the number, the more aggressive it's going to be. Your sandpaper can also contribute to a good finish. You get different ones. You've got your standard solid ones, which will have the holes in. You do also have your mesh versions. These are improved dust extraction because you're not just relying on the set holes, so you've got the full bed to pull away your dust. I'm not a massive fan of these. I do find that they fly off over time. They don't seem to stick as well as what a solid pad does. So I generally mix between the two. For a main aggressive sand, so my main sand at 80 grit, I'll use a solid pad, and then I'll jump over to probably a 120 and higher for fine work where I'm doing really a quick sand. But if I'm sanding for quite a while, I'm always going to go for the solid pads. Tips for sanding: you need to keep your sander moving at all times. You don't want to be fixed in one place. The reason why that is, it's not the dust that you need to be concerned with, it's the grit that's being worn away from your pads. If your sander is in the same place, you're going to be getting the grit that's trapped underneath your sander and it's not getting removed away by either the extractor or with you just moving. That can create pigtails, which are little swirl marks which are scratched in as the sander's spinning round and just orbiting. So keeping your sander moving is probably the first key you need to do. Also, you don't want to put too much pressure on. It's quite tempting to put a lot of pressure on because that's going to remove a lot more material. It's going to speed up your process, but that's going to allow even more scratches or the pigtails creating. It's also going to wear your pad down a lot quicker, so you're going to get a lot more grit off your pad getting trapped underneath your pad, causing scratches, and they're really difficult to remove. You're always going to have the little scratches and pigtails on, regardless how well you're sanding. The only difference is how deep they are. They are very difficult to remove. So if you're scratching in really deep, you're increasing your sanding, which is going to take even longer. Don't be tempted to dig in on an angle, which you see a lot of people do, especially on your joints, to flatten it off. You'll think you're removing it quicker, and at the stage of where you're sanding it, you won't notice that you're putting little divots and scuff marks in. They usually show up at the point where you're finishing it, so you're applying either your paint or your varnish, and by that time it's too late. You can sometimes get away with it with a clear varnish. It doesn't show that much, but if you're applying a paint or dark wood stain, those divots are going to show up straight away, and then you've got to remove all the paint, your stain, down to bare timber and start sanding again. So that's something else you need to consider. With your sander as well, you can have an issue where if you're keeping your sander still, you're going to start overheating your pad itself. So what you'll find is it's not much of an issue if you've got the self-adhesive sanding pads, but with my kind of sander and the most common type, what people have, will have the Velcro pads which stick on. If you keep your sander still for too long, it's going to start creating friction heat, and your little nylon hooks are going to start to melt. So you'll find over time that as you're sanding, your sanding pad will just shoot off because they're not stuck on properly. So keeping your sander moving is a good way to reduce that. You will at some point gonna have to change the actual base itself, because if you're doing a lot of sanding, it will wear these down. A good way to prolong the actual pad of your sander is to get a protection pad. These are Velcro on both sides, so these stick directly onto your sander pad, and then your sanding disc will then go on the top. So any wear to your pad is going to be primarily on this protector pad, which you throw away, and it's keeping your main pad intact. These are quite expensive. You can get universal bases which fit on, but they're just not as good as the original stock one that's going to come on, or a genuine part. For my sander, I believe a replacement part for this is close to £100, so they're quite expensive to do compared to around £2 to £3 per one of these. The other tip is with sanding is really just to take your time. It is a job that no one likes. I don't like it myself. It is a really boring and tedious job, especially when you're going through multiple sanding grits. On my door, it's not too bad because I'm only going 180 to a 120 and finishing on a 120 grit. But if you're doing something like furniture or a dining table, you're going to have to go down to probably up to around a 400 grit. So you're going to have around 10 to 12 different stages in sanding just over the same surface. And that's why no one likes to do it, because it is incredibly boring. And it's just the tedious doing. You can get vibrations coming through your arm, which then later on in life causes you problems, which is why having a good quality sander that removes as much vibration as possible is the best option to go for. Your cheaper ones are fine. You generally get more vibration through them, and they don't have the right size of oscillation when they're running around, but they do the job. As I've mentioned, I don't believe you have to buy the best quality or the most expensive equipment to do the job. This isn't, and this will still outperform some of your Festools and your Merkers. I have had Festool and Merkers before, and I switched to this because it's just cheaper and I wanted to try it, and it's just as good. This has been going for around 5 to 6 years now, and I've not had any problem. My Festool that I had was really expensive. I only got around 5 years from that, and the motor burnt out and it needed to repairing. The Merker, I just didn't like him. It was a fantastic sander, but I just didn't like the feel of it. It just didn't feel right for me. So I actually sent that back after a couple of months. I've also had multiple other different sanders, your DeWalt's, your Makitas, and this is the best value one and still giving you a good quality one. But really, when you're doing it, when you're sanding it, it's a combination of multiple things that's just going to make things a lot more easier and simple for you, and just speed things up over the time. Is just putting little tips and tricks into it to help speed things up, make things easier, and reduce any scratches or scuffs that you're being left at the end with. Because there's nothing worse with spending quite a lot of time on a project sanding it down. For a door, I'm taking around 30 to 40 minutes to sand the door down, which isn't too bad compared to a dining table, which you could be on for hours. But if you're spending that amount of time and then you come to finishing it with a stain, and then as soon as you put your stain on, you're seeing all your pigtails coming through, it's probably the worst feeling you can get, because you already know instantly you've got to strip everything back down and start from scratch. You've then got the issue that you've got your stain into your surface of your timber, which you've got to remove. Because if you sand it down and don't remove all of it and then reapply your finish, you're going to start getting patches where you've left the original staining. So it's really important to get your sanding down to a fine art and making sure you spend your time, don't rush it. Don't try and speed things up by putting lots of pressure on or tilting your sander. Get a good extractor. Try not to use the bag, because they just don't remove, they're going to remove the dust, but they're not removing the grit from your sandpaper, what's trapping under, and that's going to cause most of your problems with your little scratches. It's not the dust. So as long as you try and do that, you should have a successful sand and be left with a nice, clean, smooth finish, ready for applying whatever finish you're applying.